What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, and thank you for joining me once again for this Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. Folks, we're going to see a lot of card sales we have never seen before because a lot of these sales were record-breaking this week. So whenever we stumble across a record-breaking sale, you will hear this soundbite right here.
A new record!
There were record sales in both vintage and modern. There were high-end auctions that came by. So much to go over. I thank you so much for joining me in this week's recap. Folks, quick shout out to today's awesome video sponsor. There's none other than lowpopping.com, your continued source for high-end Pokemon card investments. If you're in the market for high-end and tough-to-obtain Pokemon cards, both graded and sealed, you need to go check out the inventory on lowpopping.com. There you will find that they specialize in selling rare PSA, CGC, and BGS graded Pokemon cards, along with several autographed cards and even unique test print cards. And of course, you can still easily trade for the Grail or Grails that you must have for your collection. And you can make offers on a lot of their inventory. The process is simple and extremely convenient. Lowpopping.com is a must for anyone in the market for Pokemon card Grails, and they update their inventory each and every week. I'll put a link to the website in the description of this video. Please support the channel, go check them out, and let me know what you pick up. Alright, let's start this recap off with some Black Label sales. We saw this Charizard VMAX from Champion's Path got a Black Label and sold this week for $1,825. Here we have a Black Label Reds Pikachu. This is a Japanese card that sold for $2,975. Here is a Japanese Umbreon EX from Terrestrial Festivals that got the Black Label and sold for $5,300 this week. And then we saw a Japanese Magikarp and Wailord GX that got a Black Label and sold for $9,100 this week. Now on to a few record-breaking sales that we saw this past week. We have this beautiful Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno GX stained glass promo that sold for new record heights this week as a PSA 10, selling for $465. And folks, would you believe that last year, this card as a PSA 10 was selling for around $40 just all day long? Now, nearly $500 as a PSA 10? That is nuts. The Umbreon VMAX in PSA 10 is also doing very well this week, hitting nearly $3,000. Here's a sale for $2,951. Here's a card we haven't covered in a while. It's the Shining Lugia Black Star promo from Shining Legends that sold as a PSA 10 for $680 this week. Now, this is a far cry from what it used to sell, 4+ years ago. It used to sell for over $1,000, but $680 is not too bad. We're getting close. Speaking of close to $1,000, here's the Pikachu Van Gogh promo card sold this week in auction for $940. Again for $990. $10 away from a $1,000 card yet again. And we saw a CGC 10 pristine copy of this card sell for $1,130. Here, folks, we have a record-breaking sale of the Mimikyu Scream promo in PSA 10, sold this week for $9,700. And this is the highest I've ever seen this card sell for in auction. Along with this Championship Victini EX card that sold for an even $7,000. And this is also a record-breaking sale. Couple of bangers from the XY era. Here we have a Mega Rayquaza EX from Roaring Skies, sold as a PSA 10 for $2,125, along with this Primal Groudon EX from Ancient Origins, sold for $2,651. And then, folks, we saw this Full Art Mewtwo EX Secret Rare from Breakthrough that had a record-breaking sale of $3,101 this week as a PSA 10. And then we saw another record-breaking Mewtwo sale. This is the Mewtwo GX from Shining Legends. Sold as a PSA 10 for $4,000, and then again for $4,050. Yep. On to a couple of vintage sales on eBay. Here is a CGC 9.5 Shadowless Space Set Charizard, sold for $6,085, while the CGC 10 Gem Mint copy sold for $9,685. Here we have a first edition Holo Moltres from Fossil, my favorite card from Fossil set, sold this week for $2,010. Here is a Vaporeon Holo from Skyridge that saw a record-breaking sale of $3,319. Here we have a PSA 10 Reverse Holo Caterpie from Legendary Collection that sold for a record-breaking price of $2,550. That's right, folks. Over $2,500 for a Caterpie. You heard that right. Now we also saw this reverse hollow Venusaur, also from Legendary Collection, that sold for $5,100. Here we have a Crystal Charizard. This isn't a record-breaking sale, but it's definitely up there. Sold as a PSA 10 for $26,100 this week. And then check this out, folks. Oh, this is a thing of beauty right here. It is a BGS 10 Pristine Hollow Umbreon from Skyridge that sold for $24,000. And yes, this is a Pop 1 BGS 10 example. Here we have a couple of Gold Stars. As you know, Gold Stars have been absolutely through the roof the past few months. Here is a PSA 7 Gold Star Charizard from EX Dragon Frontiers that still sold for $5,900, along with this BGS 9.5 Pikachu Gold Star card that sold for $10,500. Couple of booster box sales. Here is an XY Primal Clash booster box that sold for $1,930. Here's a Sun and Moon Unified Minds box that sold for $1,750. Here we have a Cosmic Eclipse box that sold for $2,900. And then I do believe another record-breaking sale of a Team Up booster box that sold for $7,450 big ones. On to a few sales from Fanatics Collect Weekly Auction Block. Here is a 2016 XY Blackstar Promo Blastoise EX. Sold as a PSA 10 for $5,760. And then we saw a couple of Crystal cards. Crystal cards also have been doing well, much like the Gold Stars. Here's a Crystal Crobat, sold for $4,680. Crystal Celebi sold for $5,400, and then the Crystal Ho-Oh sold for $7,800 this week. Up next, you know we've had a Gengar craze going on as well. Here's a Mega Gengar EX Secret Rare card from Phantom Forces, sold, you guessed it, for a record-breaking price of $9,000 for a PSA 10. Here we have a full art Luigi Pikachu in PSA 10 that sold in auction for $10,500, along with the full art Mario Pikachu that sold in auction for $14,400. And then here we have the 2016 Japanese XY 20th Anniversary Festa Pikachu card that sold for $15,600. And then we saw the BGS 10 copy of this card sell for an even $18,000. Here is another Crystal Charizard in PSA 10. This one sold on Fanatics for $27,600. And then here we have the Japanese Gold Star Rayquaza in PSA 10 that also sold for $27,600. And then on to some absolutely mega sales from Heritage Auctions. Here is an uncut sheet of unlimited fossil cards that sold for $6,562. Here's an uncut sheet of unlimited Neo Genesis cards sold for $5,625. Here's an uncut sheet of unlimited base set that sold for $12,500. And then we saw several high-end booster boxes come by. Here's an unlimited fossil box that sold for $9,062, while the first edition German fossil box sold for $11,250. And then the English first edition fossil booster box sold for $17,500. Here we have an unlimited jungle booster box that sold for $9,375. A first edition German jungle booster box that sold for an even $10K. And then we have this German first edition Team Rocket booster box that sold for $22,500. And then a few base set booster box variants came by. Here's a first edition German base set box that sold for $21,875. Here is a fourth print base set box that sold for $20,625. And then here we have an unlimited base set booster box that sold for $26,250. Here's a first edition Gym Heroes box that sold for $21,250. And then we saw all of the Neo booster boxes, all of the unlimited Neo booster boxes come by, and I do believe, I'm not positive, but I think they're all record-breaking sales. Here's an unlimited Neo Genesis box that sold for $31,250. An unlimited Neo Discovery box that sold for $23,125. Unlimited Neo Revelation box that sold for $28,750. And then the unlimited Neo Destiny booster box sold for a whopping $38,750 this week. Ooh, Lord have mercy. But we're not done yet, folks, because I do believe this is in fact a record-breaking sale. It is a Skyridge booster box that sold on Heritage this week for $96,875. And yes, this is the same box that contains that delicious Crystal Charizard. Whew, a few more cards to finish up this auction, folks. Keep your pants on. Here is a PSA 9 25th Anniversary Corporate History Charizard that sold for $13,750. A PSA 9 Corporate History Chansey sold for $15,625. Here is a PSA 10 First Edition Base Set Blastoise, sold for $23,750. And here, folks, this is a very interesting card. It's a Fighting Energy mixed with a Magic the Gathering stock, I guess. A Ghostly Visit Test Proof card that sold as an authentic PSA card for $14,375. And the same thing right here, folks. We have a base set Pikachu mixed with the Magic the Gathering card stock, sold for $45,000 this week. And then here we have a Magic the Gathering Pokemon test print partial uncut sheet that sold for $45,000 as well. Here we have an Art Academy Pikachu card in PSA 10 that sold for $25,000. And then we saw a 2010 World's Championship #1 trainer card that sold for $75,000 raw. And then, folks, we can't forget this sale right here. It's a PSA 8 Trophy Pikachu card. This is the third place second trophy Pikachu that sold for $142,666. And then my pick for the auction of the week, you thought I would have gave it to that Trophy Pikachu card, but I found this one here more interesting. It is a Darkrai Level X Black Star promo from the Diamond and Pearl era. Sold as a PSA 10 this week for $7,600. And folks, earlier this year, this card was selling for about $2,000. So it has nearly quadrupled in value. And you just never see it come by. It's such a low pop card. And I do got the soft spot in my hearts for the Level X cards. I love them so much. What do you think about it? So what do you think of these record-breaking sales, folks? I mean, summertime's usually when the Pokemon TCG market kind of dies down a little bit, but it only seems to be getting hotter and hotter. Let me know what you think about these auctions in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you. And as always, I'll catch you in my next one.